The late August air in Charleston hung thick and damp, a tangible presence that mirrored the suffocating weight in Eleanor Vance's chest. It clung to the skin, seeped into the lungs, and made even the simplest tasks feel like wading through warm molasses. For weeks, this oppressive humidity had been her constant companion, a physical manifestation of the unspoken, unseen thing that was slowly, inexorably poisoning her marriage. Their Mount Pleasant home, a charming low-country cottage with a wide porch and a meticulously kept garden, had once been Ellie's sanctuary. She'd filled it with light, with the vibrant colors of her graphic design work, with the aroma of shared meals and quiet evenings. Now, the silence in the house often felt accusatory. Mark, her husband of 8 years, was an increasingly spectral presence. A brief kiss in the morning, a tired murmur late at night, his thoughts seemingly miles away, lost in the labyrinthine corridors of the Palmetto Grand, the opulent downtown hotel where he was assistant general manager. Big week, another conference, he'd say, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Or, VIPs in town have to be on point. Ellie, a freelance graphic designer who worked from the sun-drenched spare bedroom, would nod, a carefully constructed understanding masking the tendrils of unease that were beginning to tighten around her heart. She'd known ambition was part of Mark's DNA, the drive that had propelled him up the ranks in the competitive hospitality industry. She'd even admired it once. But lately, his ambition felt less like a shared goal and more like a rival, a demanding mistress claiming all his time, his energy, his very essence. The first tangible crack in her carefully maintained composure appeared on a Tuesday morning. Mark had rushed off, phone forgotten on the kitchen counter, plugged into the charger. An anomaly. He was pathologically attached to it. A notification pinged. Ellie's gaze flickered towards it, a strange compulsion warring with her ingrained respect for privacy. The screen was dark, but the brief preview text was visible. V. Albright. Wonderful after-dinner conversation last night. Your usual discreet service made all the difference. Looking forward to next time. V. Albright. The name was unfamiliar. Discreet service? A chill traced its way down Ellie's spine, a stark contrast to the cloying warmth of the kitchen. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly. It was locked. Of course it was. She put it back down, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It's work, she told herself. VIP guest. He's always dealing with them. But the phrase after-dinner conversation echoed with an intimacy that felt wrong. That evening, when Mark came home, exuding the expensive scent of the hotel's signature lemongrass and ginger toiletries, Ellie tried to be casual. Busy day? Beyond, he sighed, loosening his tie. Miss Albright is in residence, CEO of some biotech giant, demanding, but if we keep her happy, it's huge for the hotel. Oh, Ellie said, her voice deliberately light. Did you have dinner with her? Mark paused, halfway to the fridge. Had to smooth over a few things with her PA, then make sure her arrangements for the week were perfect. You know how it is. He didn't quite meet her eye. A small, almost imperceptible evasion, but to Ellie, whose senses were now hyper-attuned, it felt like a seismic shift. The unease festered. It was a low-grade fever, a constant thrum beneath the surface of her days. She found herself watching Mark more closely, analyzing his moods, the cadence of his voice, searching for something. She didn't know what. Reassurance, perhaps. Or a truth she was terrified to uncover. Her work suffered. The vibrant designs on her screen seemed to mock her, their clarity a stark contrast to the murky fog in her mind. Her sleep was fractured, filled with anxious dreams she couldn't quite recall upon waking, leaving only a residue of dread. Then came the scarf. She was gathering laundry, a mundane Saturday morning ritual. Mark's gym bag lay open on the floor of their walk-in closet. Usually, she just chucked his workout clothes straight into the machine. But something, a flicker of deep peacock blue, caught her eye, nestled amongst his gray t-shirts and black shorts. She reached in, her fingers closing around something impossibly soft, impossibly fine. Silk. She pulled it out. It was a scarf, small and square, the kind a woman might tie elegantly around her neck or the handle of an expensive handbag. The color was stunning. A rich, iridescent blue she'd never seen before, with a subtle, almost invisible pattern woven into the fabric. It was undeniably luxurious, undeniably feminine. And it wasn't hers. Mark had never bought her anything like it. His gifts, though thoughtful, tended towards the practical or the overtly romantic in a more traditional sense, jewelry he knew she'd like, books by her favorite authors. This was different. Alien. Ellie sank onto the edge of their bed. the silk cool and slippery in her trembling hands. Her mind raced, desperately trying to conjure an innocent explanation. A gift for a colleague? A promotional item from the hotel? But the sheer expense of it, the intimate way it had been tucked away, no. This felt secret. This felt like a betrayal. The air in the room seemed to crackle. The V. Albright texts, Mark's increasing distance, his evasiveness, the late nights. It all coalesced into a horrifying, sickening certainty. The scarf wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a flag, planted on the territory of her marriage, staking a claim she hadn't known was being contested. The world tilted, colors dimming, sounds receding. All she could feel was a cold, hollowing dread spreading through her, paralyzing her. Her greatest fear, the one rooted deep in the soil of a childhood where emotional availability had been a scarce commodity, was unfolding in real time. Betrayal. Abandonment. She wanted to scream, to smash something, to confront Mark the moment he walked through the door. But a chilling, pragmatic part of her brain took over, a part she hadn't known existed. A confrontation without irrefutable proof would lead to more lies, more gaslighting. He was good at that, she realized with a fresh stab of pain. He could make her doubt her own sanity. She needed to know. She needed to see. The idea, when it first flickered into her mind, was so audacious, so utterly out of character, and that she almost dismissed it. Go undercover. Get a job at the Palmetto Grand. See for herself what was happening in Mark's world, the world that had stolen him from her. It was insane. It was desperate. It was exactly what she was going to do. The decision once made settled a strange cold calm over her. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it sharpened, morphing into a focused, almost obsessive resolve. Ellie, the empathetic, slightly anxious graphic designer, began to recede, and in her place, a new persona started to emerge. Grace Linden. Grace Linden was a woman seeking a fresh start, someone with a vague, unverifiable history of customer service roles in a distant state. Ellie spent hours crafting Grace's resume, choosing a common, unremarkable name, inventing a plausible, if sparse, work history. She dyed her honey blonde hair a mousy brown, bought plain, nondescript clothes from a discount store, and practiced speaking in a slightly lower, more subdued tone. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The transformation was unsettling, but also strangely liberating. It was as if by shedding her own identity, she could also shed the paralyzing weight of her emotions, at least temporarily. She applied for a housekeeping position at the Palmetto Grand online. The application form was straightforward. The requirements minimal beyond a willingness to work hard and a clean background check, which, thankfully, Eleanor Vance possessed. To her surprise, she received a call for an interview within days. The interview was with Mrs. Rodriguez, the head of housekeeping. She was a woman in her late 50s with lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes but a spine of steel. Her gaze was assessing, missing nothing. Ellie, as Grace, kept her answers brief, her demeanor respectful and eager. She spoke of needing stable work, of being a quick learner. Mrs. Rodriguez listened, her expression unreadable. "This is hard work, Miss Linden," she said, her voice raspy. "Long hours, demanding guests, not glamorous. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Ellie said, her heart pounding. "I'm a hard worker." A flicker of something, perhaps approval, perhaps just weary acceptance, crossed Mrs. Rodriguez's face. "All right. We're short-staffed. You can start Monday. Uniforms are provided. Be here at 7 a.m. sharp." And just like that, Grace Linden was an employee of the Palmetto Grand. Ellie walked out of the hotel into the glaring Charleston sun, a strange mix of terror and triumph churning within her. She was in. Her first few days were a blur of physical exertion and sensory overload. The Palmetto Grand, from a guest's perspective, was a masterpiece of effortless luxury. Gleaming marble floors, soaring atriums, filled with an improbable profusion of fresh flowers, hushed corridors leading to opulent suites. From a housekeeper's perspective, it was a relentless beast, demanding constant feeding and cleaning. The work was grueling. Stripping beds, scrubbing bathrooms, vacuuming endless expanses of plush carpet, all under the pressure of a ticking clock. Her muscles ached in places she didn't know existed. Her hands became raw from cleaning chemicals. She learned the art of the perfectly tucked corner, the streak-free mirror, the invisible efficiency that was the hallmark of five-star service. She moved through the hotel like a ghost, her uniform a cloak of invisibility. Guests barely registered her presence, stepping around her cleaning cart without a glance. Colleagues, mostly women from diverse backgrounds, were too busy, too tired for much more than cursory greetings. There was a quiet camaraderie, though, born of shared toil and unspoken understanding. They were the invisible army that kept the glittering facade of the Palmetto Grand intact. And through it all, Ellie watched. Her eyes, shadowed by her deliberately drab appearance, scanned every corridor, every public space for Mark. The first time she saw him, her breath hitched. He was striding through the lobby, deep in conversation with a man in an expensive suit, his posture confident, his laughter easy. He looked every inch the successful executive. He walked right past her, a few feet away, without a flicker of recognition. The pang of that near miss, the chasm of their separate realities existing in the same physical space, was sharper than any physical pain. She learned to track his movements indirectly, listening to snippets of staff gossip, noting the floors where his meetings were held. She learned that Victoria Albright was indeed a regular, always occupying one of the sprawling penthouse suites on the top floor, known for her exacting standards and her occasional surprising acts of generosity towards staff who pleased her. Her encounters with Julian Hayes, the general manager, were infrequent and brief. He was a tall man, early 40s, with a lean, almost ascetic face, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes that seemed to see everything. He moved with a quiet authority, his presence commanding respect without demanding attention. The first time, he'd simply nodded as Mrs. Rodriguez introduced our new girl, Grace. Later, during a random spot check of a room she'd just cleaned, he'd offered a curt, "Good, thorough," before moving on. There was something about his observant stillness that made Ellie uneasy. He didn't exude the easy charm of Mark. His was a more contained, thoughtful energy. She found herself trying to avoid his gaze, afraid that those keen eyes might somehow pierce her flimsy disguise. One afternoon, she was polishing a brass railing in a quiet corridor overlooking the main lobby. Mark was down below, schmoozing a group of conference organizers. He was animated, his gestures expansive, his smile dazzling. Ellie watched him, a knot of cold fury and profound sadness tightening in her chest. This was the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with. And he was a stranger, a talented performer playing a role. Suddenly, she felt a presence beside her, Julian Hayes. He wasn't looking at her, but at Mark below. "He's good at his job," Julian said, his voice neutral. "Your husband." Ellie froze. Her husband? How could he possibly? Her mind blanked with panic. She stared straight ahead, her heart hammering. Then Julian continued, his gaze still fixed on Mark. "Vance, he knows how to work a room." He turned his head slightly, and his eyes met hers. There was no accusation in them, just a mild, almost detached curiosity. "You seem very focused on his performance, Grace." Ellie's cheeks burned. She stammered, "Just admiring his professionalism, sir. He seems very capable." Julian's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "Indeed." He gave a slight nod and walked away, leaving Ellie trembling, her carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. Did he suspect something? Or was it just an innocent observation? The ambiguity was terrifying. The days bled into weeks. The Charleston summer deepened, the heat relentless. Ellie's double life was taking its toll. At home, she was a ghost, barely interacting with Mark, who seemed oblivious to her inner turmoil, attributing her quietness to fatigue from her fictitious new part-time admin job she'd invented to explain her absences. At the hotel, she was Grace, the diligent, anonymous housekeeper, her senses perpetually on high alert. The strain was immense. She was losing weight. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her friend Chloe, during their increasingly fraught phone calls, begged her to stop. "Ellie, this is crazy," Chloe had pleaded from Atlanta. "You're gonna break yourself. Just confront him. What more proof do you need than that damn scarf?" "I need to see it, Chloe," Ellie had whispered back, huddled in her car in the hotel's staff parking lot. "I need to know it's real, not just something I've conjured in my head. I need to understand." "Understand what? That he's a cheating bastard?" Some things don't need a dissertation, Elle. But Ellie couldn't stop. She was on a precipice, and the only way forward, it seemed, was down. The confirmation, when it came, was both brutal and mundane. Victoria Albright had checked out of the penthouse suite west. It was Ellie's turn to clean it, a daunting task given the sheer size and opulence of the space. The suite reeked of expensive perfume and stale champagne. As Ellie methodically stripped the king-sized bed, her eyes scanned the room, a habit now deeply ingrained. Beside the discreet brushed steel waste bin in the lavishly appointed sitting area, almost hidden by a silk lampshade, was a crumpled room service receipt. Her hand, encased in a blue latex glove, reached for it. Her breath caught. The order was for a bottle of Dom Perignon and a selection of petit fours. Time, 2:17 a.m. Not unusual for a VIP guest, but at the bottom, where the guest would sign or a staff member would note a comp, was a familiar flowing signature, M. Vance. Not for a business expense, not charged to Ms. Albright's account. It was authorized by Mark. For champagne and dessert in the early hours of the morning. In Victoria Albright's suite. Nausea rose in Ellie's throat. She crumpled the receipt, her knuckles white. It was damning, but still a sliver of her mind, the part desperate for denial, whispered, maybe he was just ensuring good service, going above and beyond. Then she saw it. On the polished mahogany bedside table, half tucked under the base of a heavy crystal lamp, something glinted, small, silver. She moved closer, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. It was a cufflink, a distinctive, brushed silver cufflink with a small inset onyx stone, one of a pair she had given Mark for their 5th wedding anniversary. There was no ambiguity now, no room for doubt, for desperate rationalizations. This was it, the cold, hard, irrefutable proof. The cufflink lay there, a tiny, gleaming monument to his betrayal, to the ruins of their marriage. The air rushed out of Ellie's lungs. The opulent suite, with its panoramic views of the Charleston harbor, suddenly felt like a tomb. She could hear the blood roaring in her ears, a rushing, deafening sound that drowned out the distant city noise. Her vision blurred. The silk wallpaper seemed to ripple and sway. She didn't remember finishing the room. Her body moved on autopilot, hands performing the familiar tasks, folding, wiping, scrubbing, while her mind reeled in a silent, internal vortex of agony. The cufflink felt like a burning coal in the pocket of her drab uniform. Somehow, she made it out of the suite, down the service elevator, her face a rigid mask. She needed to escape, to breathe, to break. She found a rarely used staff stairwell, dark and smelling faintly of disinfectant and old paint. She sank onto the cool concrete steps, the strength finally deserting her. And then she shattered. Silent, racking sobs tore through her, shaking her entire frame. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious, carrying with them 8 years of love, of trust, of shared dreams, now all turned to ash. The pain was a physical entity, crushing her chest, stealing her breath. She pressed her fist to her mouth to stifle the sounds, curling into herself, a small broken figure in the dim, forgotten stairwell. This was the bottom. This was the truth she had so desperately, so foolishly sought. Footsteps, coming down. Ellie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. She scrambled to wipe her tears, to compose herself, but it was too late. Julian Hayes rounded the landing above her and stopped. He looked down, his expression initially one of surprise, then shifting as he took in her disheveled state, her tear-ravaged face. He didn't seem to immediately register her as Grace, the quiet housekeeper. He just saw a woman in profound distress. He descended a few steps, his movements unhurried. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Ellie stared at him, her carefully constructed Grace persona obliterated by the sheer force of her grief. Words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say? She shook her head, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. Sometimes she finally choked out, her voice raw, unrecognizable even to herself. Sometimes you see things you can't unsee, things that break everything. The words were a torrent, released from a place of unbearable pressure. Julian didn't press for details. He didn't ask who she was or what she meant. Instead, he did something utterly unexpected. He sat down on the step just below hers, not too close, but not distant either. He looked out at the blank concrete wall opposite them, a thoughtful expression on his face. "This place," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble in the stillness of the stairwell. "It can be a beautiful facade. Grand, isn't it?" He paused, then continued. "But behind every beautiful facade, there are pressures, tremendous pressures, on the structure, on the people within it." He finally turned his gaze to her, and his eyes, usually so keen and discerning, were filled with a surprising softness, a weary understanding. Sometimes people break, or they break things. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a neatly folded handkerchief, offering it to her. Then, from a slim leather briefcase he'd set beside him, he produced a small bottle of water. "Here." Ellie took them, her fingers clumsy. The simple human kindness of the gesture, from this man who was practically a stranger, who was her husband's boss, was so unexpected, so profoundly decent, that it pierced through the layers of her pain, offering a tiny, fragile sliver of solace. He didn't pry. He didn't judge. He just sat there, a quiet presence in her storm. She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes for long, ashamed of her breakdown, terrified of what he might guess. But in that moment, in the dim, forgotten stairwell of the Palmetto Grand, Eleanor Vance, stripped of her disguise and her composure, felt seen. Not as Grace the housekeeper, not as Mark Vance's oblivious wife, but simply as a human being in pain. And it was a strange, unsettling, and infinitesimally comforting feeling. The next morning, Grace Linden did not report for her shift at the Palmetto Grand. Her uniform lay folded neatly on the bed in the small, anonymous room she had rented under her false name for changing before and after work. The charade was over. Ellie drove home to Mount Pleasant, the cufflink a cold, hard knot in her jeans pocket. The Charleston morning was bright, the sky a piercing blue, mocking the darkness that had settled in her soul. She felt strangely calm, emptied out, the violent storm of awe and grief from the previous day having subsided into a desolate, resolute ache. Mark was in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee, scrolling through news on his tablet. He looked up, surprised, when she walked in. "Ellie? What are you doing home? Thought you had that early start at the library?" He fumbled over the lie she'd told him about her fictitious part-time job. She didn't answer. She walked over to the granite island, opened her hand, and let the silver cufflink clatter onto the smooth, cool surface. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out the peacock blue silk scarf, letting it fall beside the cufflink. The vibrant color seemed to scream in the quiet, sunlit kitchen. Mark stared at the items, his face paling. The tablet slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the floor. "Ellie, what? Where did you get those?" His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Does it matter?" Ellie's voice was devoid of inflection, flat and cold. "They tell a story, don't they, Mark? A story you forgot to share with me." He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a dawning panic, a trapped animal desperation. "Ellie, I can explain." "Can you?" she asked, the first flicker of her profound pain surfacing. "Can you explain 8 years of my life? Can you explain the vows we took, the dreams we built? Or were those just inconvenient details in your ascent?" The confrontation wasn't loud or hysterical. It was worse. It was a slow, meticulous dissection of their dead marriage. Ellie laid out the evidence, not just the physical tokens of his betrayal, but the emotional ones too. His distance, his lies, his chilling ability to compartmentalize. She spoke of the woman she had become, a shadow haunting the periphery of his life, a detective in her own home. Mark's defenses crumbled. The smooth charm, the confident veneer, dissolved, revealing a man she barely recognized. Weak, flustered, and ultimately selfish. He cycled through clumsy denials, then partial admissions, then a torrent of excuses. Stress at work, the pressure to succeed, Victoria Albright's flattery, her power, the intoxicating allure of that world. He even tried to imply a shared responsibility, a subtle suggestion that perhaps she had grown distant, that their connection had faded. Ellie listened, a cold anger solidifying within her. "Don't you dare, Mark," she said, her voice finally trembling with suppressed fury. "Don't you dare try to lay any part of this at my feet. This was your choice, your betrayal. You didn't just cheat on me, you cheated on us. You cheated on everything we were supposed to be." The fight, if it could be called that, drained the last vestiges of her hope. By afternoon, the house felt like a mausoleum, heavy with unspoken words and irreparable damage. Ellie went upstairs and packed a suitcase. Not everything, just enough. She moved with a strange, detached efficiency. When she came back down, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He looked up, his face haggard. "Ellie, please, don't go. We can fix this. Counseling. I'll do anything." Ellie looked at him, at the man she had loved more than anyone, and felt nothing. Just a vast, empty space where her love used to be. "Some things can't be fixed, Mark," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Some things are irrevocably broken." She walked out the door, into the oppressive afternoon heat, leaving behind her home, her husband, her old life. She drove across the Ravenel Bridge, the graceful arches a stark contrast to the ugliness she was leaving behind. She'd found a small, furnished short-term rental in downtown Charleston online, a sterile, anonymous space that felt blessedly empty. The first person she called was Chloe. The story tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. Chloe listened, her silence more comforting than any platitude. "I'm booking a flight," Chloe said finally, her voice resolute. "I'll be there tomorrow." The following weeks were a blur. Chloe arrived, a whirlwind of pragmatic support and fierce loyalty. She handled the initial consultation with a divorce lawyer, her sharp legal mind cutting through Ellie's emotional fog. She made Ellie eat, made her talk, let her cry. The grief came in waves, unpredictable and overwhelming. Sometimes it was a sharp, stabbing pain. Other times, a dull, persistent ache that settled deep in her bones. The anger was a cleaner burn, a righteous fire that on some days was the only thing that kept her moving. She walked the historic streets of Charleston like a somnambulist, the city's beauty a painful counterpoint to her inner turmoil. She found herself drawn to the water, to the battery, watching the ships move out to sea, a symbol of departures and journeys. She started sketching again, something she hadn't done for pleasure in years. Rough, charcoal drawings of gnarled oak trees, of iron gates, of the shifting patterns of light on cobblestones. It was a way to channel the chaos, to find a small measure of order in the wreckage. One blustery afternoon, about a month after she'd left Mark, Ellie was at Waterfront Park, sketching the pineapple fountain, its welcoming spray a stark contrast to her mood. She was lost in the lines on her paper when a shadow fell over her. "Grace, isn't it?" a quiet voice said. Or, perhaps not. Ellie's head snapped up. Julian Hayes stood before her, a slight, almost hesitant smile on his face. He was dressed casually, in a linen shirt and chinos, looking younger, yet less formidable than he did in his GM suit. Her heart leaped into her throat. She flushed, embarrassed, exposed. "Mr. Hayes," she stammered, closing her sketchbook. "Julian, please," he said, his eyes kind. "And you are?" She took a deep breath. The charade was over. "Eleanor," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Eleanor Vance." He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful, searching. "I thought it might be something like that." He gestured to the empty space on the bench beside her. "May I?" Ellie nodded, a strange mix of apprehension and a reluctant curiosity stirring within her. He sat, leaving a comfortable distance between them. "I confess," he said, looking out at the fountain, "I had a feeling Grace Linden wasn't telling the whole story. Your distress that day in the stairwell. It was too profound for a simple workplace upset. The truth, or at least her version of it, tumbled out. She told him about Mark, about her suspicions, about her desperate, ill-conceived plan to go undercover. She didn't spare herself, laying bare her fear, her pain, her foolishness. She didn't mention the cufflink or the specifics of what she'd found, just the devastating confirmation of betrayal. Julian listened patiently, his expression unreadable at first. When she finally fell silent, her cheeks burning, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, his voice gentle, "That took an extraordinary amount of courage, Eleanor. Misguided, perhaps." A faint smile touched his lips, but courageous nonetheless. "Or an extraordinary amount of desperation," Ellie said, a wry, sad smile playing on her own lips. "Perhaps they're often two sides of the same coin," he mused. "The hospitality world, it can look glamorous from the outside, but it breeds secrets. It thrives on discretion. Sometimes that discretion can curdle into deceit." He paused. "I'm sorry for what you've been through, for what Mark, for what happened." There was no judgment in his voice, only a quiet empathy that resonated deeply with Ellie. They talked for a while longer that afternoon, not about Mark, but about Charleston, about books, about the small, unexpected beauties of life. When they parted, Ellie felt a sliver of lightness, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. She started therapy, a difficult but necessary step recommended by Chloe. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to unpack the grief, the anger, the sense of lost identity. She threw herself into her graphic design work, finding a new focus, a renewed sense of purpose. She landed a small project with a local art gallery, then another, larger one for a food festival. Her creativity, so long dormant under the weight of her dying marriage, began to bloom again. She and Julian began to meet occasionally, for coffee at a quiet cafe, for a walk along Folly Beach as the weather started to cool. Their conversations were never about Mark or the hotel directly, but about life, its complexities, its disappointments, its unexpected moments of grace. Julian was a surprisingly good listener, thoughtful and perceptive. He spoke little of his own past, but Ellie sensed a quiet melancholy in him, a hint of old wounds that made him understanding of hers. Their friendship was tentative, respectful, a fragile thing built on a foundation of shared, if unspoken, understanding of pain and resilience. The divorce was finalized in early autumn. The Charleston air, once so oppressive, now carried a crisp, clean edge. The leaves on the ancient oaks in Ansonboro, where Ellie had found a charming, light-filled apartment in a historic carriage house, were beginning to turn shades of gold and russet. She was leaner now, her eyes clearer, her laughter, when it came, more genuine. Mark had moved out of their Mount Pleasant home, opting for a smaller, more sterile condo closer to downtown. Ellie heard through the legal channels that he was still at the Palmetto Grand, though his trajectory seemed to have stalled. Victoria Albright, she presumed, had long since moved on to other hotels, other diversions. His consequences were his own to bear. Ellie was focused on her own path. One cool October evening, Julian invited Ellie to dinner. Not at a grand, opulent restaurant, but at a small, unpretentious bistro tucked away on a quiet side street, known for its simple, delicious food and its cozy atmosphere. The conversation flowed easily, comfortably. They talked about their respective days, about a new exhibition at the Gibbs Museum, about the peculiar beauty of Charleston in the fall. As he walked her home through the gaslit streets, the silence between them was no longer awkward, but filled with an unspoken warmth. At her gate, under the soft glow of a carriage lantern, he turned to her. "I'm glad our paths crossed again, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft, his gaze direct and sincere. "Truly." Ellie looked up at him, at his kind eyes, at the lines of experience etched around them. She saw not a boss, not a stranger, but a man who had shown her compassion when she was at her lowest, who had offered friendship without expectation. A sense of peace, tentative but real, settled over her. "Me too, Julian," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "More than you know." He didn't try to kiss her. He didn't push for more. He simply held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement of the delicate, hopeful thing that was beginning to blossom between them. Then, with a slight nod, he wished her good night and walked away. Ellie watched him go, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine she'd had at dinner. She turned and walked up the path to her little carriage house, the scent of autumn leaves and damp earth filling the air. Inside, her apartment was filled with her sketches, her books, the vibrant colors of her ongoing design projects. It was a space that was entirely her own, a testament to her resilience, to her journey back to herself. She knew the scars of Mark's betrayal would always be a part of her, a reminder of a painful chapter. But they no longer defined her. She had walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, more self-aware, more authentically Eleanor than she had ever been. She had learned that endings, however devastating, could also be beginnings. That trust, once shattered, could perhaps, with time and care, be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and shared vulnerability. Sitting by her window, looking out at the moonlit Charleston street, Ellie picked up her sketchbook. A new design, a new idea, was beginning to take shape. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a profound sense of hope. Not for a fairy tale ending, but for the quiet, steady, unfolding beauty of a life reclaimed.